Basketball practice is not a dance recital. And sometimes when I observe practices at all levels, from really famous coaches to youth coaches, I could walk away and say, that's a nice dance recital. When does practice start? We all have room to growth. And I'm not here to tell anyone they're wrong. I'm here to challenge your thinking, stimulate your thinking, and to be able to constantly ask the question, is there a better way? And if I told you I had a way to engage players more deeply, a way to help them become the best version of themselves, to help them have more fun, and to help your players improve more and your team have more success, wouldn't you want that? And that's the question that we're going to keep in mind as we go through. Is there a better way? As I said, I'm here to share. I'm grateful to do that. The question is there something that I can share that can add to what you do, can make over what you do, or can take away from what you do? And I'd say the last one is probably one of the most important things that seems to come from me sharing from the NBA on down to youth level around the world, is that concept of what can we remove? What is fluff? What is not actually contributing to your players getting better and your team's success? And the problem with a lot of those drills that I just showed you is there are no decisions. There's no unpredictability. Everyone knows exactly what's going to happen. And that's not what happens in basketball. And we know that as coaches. So the question is, why are we practicing in a way that we know the game doesn't happen? So we want you to reimagine the game a little bit in terms of how we think it and how we teach it. And by and large, I'd say most coaches understand intuitively that playing basketball helps skills and decisions transfer to the game. The question is, do we need any of the on-air or block type of practice to be able to do that? Eastern Michigan University using a similar drill from half court, where this is pass ahead one-on-one. And if you go to the Basketball Immersion YouTube channel, you'll see pass ahead one-on-one. And the idea is that we can manipulate constraints, and I'll talk about that in a second relative to this drill, to be able to help shape learning. So the constraints. What is a constraint? Well, a constraint is something that shapes learning. And really, if you want to think about it this way, a constraint is something where we limit something to afford something else. So if I take Elijah to the buffet, I am going to limit him to just salad. Well, I take another person to the buffet, they can have salad and they can have pasta, and then another person can eat whatever they want. So within an individual practice, we can account for individual variability with this concept of constraints, where certain players are afforded certain things and other players are not. Well, we can apply that same principle to shaping specific things within game-based play. This is a one-on-one, so this is the easiest, most, simple level of game-based play. And within that, we can manipulate the constraint saying, okay, the defenders start behind the offensive player. And now that would give the offensive player an advantage. Well, they have an advantage. How can they leverage that advantage? They work on a push-out dribble to take away the recovery angle of the defender. Okay, well, let's manipulate that constraint and start the defender ahead of the offensive player. Now, likely on the catch, the defender is going to get ahead of the offensive player and to be able to get in what we call chest-to-chest positioning, which is defensive advantage. And now the offensive player has to make a decision and try and find an advantage. And we consider finding space and advantage. And then we can also add different constraints, which I'll show you later, which take away direction limits in terms of dribbles, because clearly they don't have the advantage of space in a game. And we'll talk about that. But basically, we're going to try and shape skills and decisions in game-based play and remove this predictability of on-air drills where a player knows exactly what they're going to do. That is mindless practice. So let's come back here. Right now, this player, whatever the coach has prescribed for them, just like a doctor is giving you a prescription, take these 2 pills at this time on this day, it creates a mindless activity. Well, the doctor, it's to your benefit. The basketball player, it's not to your benefit, because that's not how the game happens. The game happens in an open, unpredictable environment where both teammates and defenders provide visual stimuli and distracting information from which we must make decisions. And I'll go through the decision process here in a little bit. But this repetitive type of drill where the player knows exactly what to do, back up, cross over in a pattern, and then go forward in a pattern, that is akin to memorizing something in school. And all of you that have memorized something in school, you know that after you memorize it, you usually forget it a few weeks later. We would rather engage the player in mindful practice that leads to retention practice and retrieval practice. And we'll talk about those two things as well. But essentially, it's this: on the verge of forgetting is when someone is learning, because they have to retrieve something that they've learned previously, and they've got to be mindful. That process of retrieving it helps them remember it. So if we go back to this Eastern Michigan example, now the player prior to catching the ball, because we have a constraint, we understand relative to that, the offensive player may understand they have an advantage or they may have a disadvantage to start, or it may be neutral. Neutral is what we call it when they have no advantage and they have to create one. But relative to that, now they must make decisions based on perception and decision. They perceive what the defender is doing. They perceive their space relative to the basket. They perceive if there's more teammates. Obviously, if we build this up, their perception is relative to your teammates or extra defenders. But that perception is the first part of skill execution. We perceive, we decide, and then we execute, and then we get feedback on skill. And I'll show you a slide later that will help you get that as well. But in terms of this, prior to catching the ball, they know, okay, they've got an advantage, disadvantage. So we're creating a simpler version of the game. But once they catch it now, they're working on live decision-making based on perception and decision. So it could be the use of a dribble. It could be the use of an angle. It could be finding space in a particular way. And obviously it could be a counter depending on the defender recovers. And then of course it's some type of decision at the basket relative to finishing. We always think about scoring at the basket, whether it's a layup or something, 2-foot stop. We always think about it relative to defender, but most of the time, and especially for young athletes, the biggest problem is relative to the basket. There's space relative to the basket. So all those things apply right now, and they are getting game-like repetitions in a game-like way because we've simply added a defender and we're playing live one-on-one. Of course, we've got to build that, and you'll see that here. It's not enough to just do that. We have to build it into you'll see a few more. But here's where we want to go with it is whatever you use, and this is where I really value one-on-one. And the value of one-on-one is obviously individual player development. Offense and defense are being developed at the same time, which is another advantage of coaching the game while they play the game. Is it's not one-way teaching, it's two-way teaching, meaning I'm coaching both sides of the ball at the same time. Well, even if I'm just focused on offense, the defense is still getting game-like reps. So we're not taking one side of the ball and isolating it. We're coaching both sides at the same time, which connects more information to the game and allows for more information to be transferred to the game. So in this example here, now we're connecting that same drill. This is the two-side fast break. It's a breakdown of the two-side fast break. If you're not familiar with that, you can go to basketballimmersion.com and look at some blogs and some videos on the two-side fast break. But essentially, there's a hit-ahead pass similar to what we just showed in the one-on-one. And now we're connecting, okay, do you have an advantage? Do you don't have an advantage? And make a decision based on perception and decision, and then execute a skill based on that. And in this example, they had two trail defenders, two advanced defenders, what we would call ball and heels, heels meaning the player that covers the rim, ball means the player that covers the ball, and then recovering defenders. So right now, his number one fundamental is find space. Now, it could be space relative to a dribble. It could be space relative to a pass. There's a two-side forming over here where this player is filling the corner and this player is filling the 45. But that's what we mean by fundamental is space. Look, we can spend hours and hours of isolated dribbling skills with this player, and that's cool. I'm not anti doing that for the player to do that and lead themselves doing that. I am an advocate for coaches. All of you, your value is connecting skills and decisions. Your value is connecting perception, action, coupling which is the scientific term for that, the evidence-based idea behind that. Players can do on-air dribbling, isolated dribbling things on their own. Send them a video, tell them to do it, teach it in the first practice, and say, okay, now you're responsible for doing this on your own. I'm not anti the player doing it. I just don't think it's valuable use of your time as a coach, because your expertise as a coach is helping a player connect their skills and decisions in a practice environment. So right now, as good or as bad as this player is ball handling, the principle, the fundamental remains the same. Where can he find space? Where can he find an advantage for himself or his teammates?